Thank you, Anchor, for sponsoring this video. When you first learn about software engineering, you think it's about building things, but in reality, that's rarely the case. You're rarely engineering something new. In fact, about 10% of it is building things, and 90% of it is maintaining the thing you built incorrectly. And I've been lucky enough to be in this 10% building for quite a while. The 10% building, that phase of engineering, it's great. It's asynchronous. Like, you might synchronously meet with people in order to discuss requirements, but once you have the information you need, you know how to build the system, you can just go off and build it and not have to be in 3-hour meetings discussing an issue. You can just build it and then you're done. And that's it. And you might be thinking that you're building this brand new thing that millions of people will use. And that very well could be the case, but likely you're building something that no one will ever use, or that millions of people might use, but it's not going to be for a very long time. And that is something you have to accept in this phase. This phase, if you're in this 10% building. Now, this other 90%, this is what most of the world does in software engineering, and it's maintaining all of the things that we've built and adding onto them, maybe adding new features, but mostly making sure the main product that's bringing money in for the company, making sure it doesn't break. But when you're maintaining things, it's your glorified customer service, your glorified technical support. Something goes wrong with the product and you troubleshoot it, and then you tell them, wait, actually that was a feature, not a bug, that was meant to happen. Maybe you spend 3 hours looking into that, but actually it's the expected behavior. And a lot of times when you're troubleshooting this thing, it's a synchronous activity. You're in meetings, you're talking to people, you're trying to figure out why this issue is occurring. And the issue could be something that's expected, the expected behavior. It could be a known bug. It could be due to an ongoing outage in AWS or Google Cloud. It could be because some other team's deploying and they mess something up. And with this maintaining, this doesn't mean you're not writing code. It just means the code you're writing likely doesn't change the end product. It's making sure the end product doesn't break. And so you're still doing deployments. You're still contributing to a code base. But now, if something goes wrong during the deployment, it could affect millions of people, millions of customers. And that's not good. And you know what you need for this synchronous communication? A good webcam. And Anchor's PowerComp C200 will help you do that. Here it is. We are going to peel off the wrapper and we're gonna set it up. It comes with a single cord. It's a USB. It's actually interesting because there are many types of cords called USB, but they're not actually a USB. There's USB-A, there's USB-C. So USB-C goes in here, and then you'll put this into your computer. You might need an adapter for this. And let's see what the picture quality is gonna be like. It has this little thing so it can easily grip onto a regular desktop monitor or a laptop. And so we're gonna put it on a laptop, and it's pretty secure. Now, to get the full experience, we're gonna go to a website. It's software.anchorwork.com. And we're gonna download some software so we can personalize the webcam experience. Someone just bought it in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania. All right, so you may need to unplug it and then replug it in order for it to work. Typically, if there's ever an upgrade offered for a particular software, you should do it unless it will completely change your user experience, if it's a user experience you don't want. Typically, that's not the case. Sometimes you're forced to upgrade, so you might as well just do it whenever you see it. So there we go. We'll go over to the control settings. We can change the resolution. Oh, so if you want a extreme close up, There we go. Like an artificial light, you know how it like can sometimes flicker? That's what this is for. Sure, we'll turn that on. Gives you information about the device, the firmware. Oh, we can change our brightness. Oh, okay. Sharpness. Get saturation. Oh, and you have your contrast ratio. I see a little bit, okay. That's kind of nice. I like an increased horizontal flip. I think this is gonna, if we wanna do that. Different types of sound. So omnidirectional would be like 180 this way, and then the sound beyond the angle range will be significantly suppressed. And so say you have a lot of background noise, it will suppress. If you have it on the 90, it will suppress that. So let's do that. What's your setup? I work at the same desk every day, sometimes hybrid, or the world is my oyster. We're gonna select that one to manifest remote work. Oh, and then it recommends various cameras. Oh, and this is the camera that we have. And that's what this looks like. We can log in to save our settings. I think these are just gonna bring up, these are other settings that we have. And that's our webcam. So I said I was in this camp, you know, I love this camp, love this realm of building things. Even if no one uses it, that's okay, because, you know, it was really fun to build. But now I'm in this camp, the maintaining things, maintaining the thing that makes the company a lot of money. So I'm gonna take you through a day of what it's like to do that and be a maintainer engineer. And today we actually have something called a deployment. For those that don't know what a deployment is, it's essentially taking the code that you've been working on, you've been adding new features to, you've been fixing bugs for, you've been writing this code that does all these, you know, cool things, and you want to make it available to your customers. And so you need to move that code to a different computer so that it can be accessible to these customers. You don't want to just edit the live code that's on the server or computer that the customers are using, because if something breaks, then that's bad. Like ideally you do a deployment of several changes, or regardless, you make your changes on a different set of computers, test them, verify them before they go to your end customer, so that the end customer gets a good experience no matter what. They just see the addition of the changes, the bug fixes. They don't see the whole path of how it got, the things you had to do in order to fix it. So to simplify that, it's transferring code from one computer to another to make it available to customers. Now, an actual deployment, and maybe some people do this every day, like as new code changes come in, some people do it once a week. Our team does it once a week, typically, sometimes twice a week. It actually consists of pressing a button, and that's it. You just press one button in a deployment, and everything else is pretty much automated. So you watch a screen and you wait for it to go from in progress to green, and then you're good to go, and you make sure everything still works as expected. You might have to roll back the changes if, you know, they don't do what they're meant to do. But, you know, in theory, you press the button and then you watch a screen, a loading screen. And that's a deployment. Now, in addition to watching the loading screen, you're also going to watch dashboards, and you're gonna look at, okay, am I getting the same amount of traffic that I'm used to having with my code? Is it receiving the same amount of requests? Is the duration of how long, you know, certain processes take in my service, how is that? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Is it as expected? You know, what about the other services I use as a part of my code base? Are they working as expected? Are we getting any unexpected errors? You know, I can run some tests locally on maybe my devices, all these sorts of things. In this, you're also going to be looking at your support channel. And so here we have our list. So when you press the button to deploy the code, you'll look at the dashboards, you'll manually test that your, you know, product is working as is expected. So you'll do like a single request. If it's a microservice, you might press some buttons on your iOS app if it was something like that, with front end. And then you'll have your support channel announcing like that you've done the deployment. You might have people coming into your support channel saying it's not working or they're getting increased errors. And you're also probably gonna have some kind of synchronous meeting where you're doing all of this. Maybe you're doing it with other people, and you know, this is a lot of stuff. Like, why is this not all automated? Well, in some cases it is, but if it's a product that doesn't have a lot of testing, like automated testing, or it is a high visibility product, meaning if it goes down, you know, 90% of the company's money is washed away, you might have manual deployments just to make sure everything is working as expected. To rely 100% on machines to automate absolutely everything about your deployment process is putting a lot of trust into your automated systems. And some companies are willing to do that. For example, Amazon does like a deployment a second, and then other companies aren't ready to put their trust into automated processes in that way, or just do not have enough robust testing, or don't have the resources to put that much robust testing into their services, and so manual deployments are what happens. So I'm gonna press the button. You can see I started it 2 minutes ago. It's yellow, so still in progress, and we'll wait for it to deploy, and then once it is deployed, we will verify the changes, and then we can consider the code deployment complete. And then another thing that we're rolling out today is, and this would probably be an hour or so after our regular changes deploy, and that's because we want to make sure that our code deployment does not affect this other change we're making, this other rollout we're doing, and it's essentially changing where we get our data from for a particular service. And so we were getting our data from service A, now we're getting our data from service B, and we're transitioning. We're at 25%, we're going to 50%, we're transitioning that so that we get our data from service B instead of service A. So now it'll be half and half. Eventually we'll get all of our data from service B, but we're keeping that separate from the actual code deployment because that percentage change is in like a dynamic configuration file, if you will, and so it allows us to do it outside of a regular code deployment. We just make a change in this specific, on a website, essentially saying, hey, let's change this number to 50%, and that's it. It's not something that's written in code, written on GitHub. It's an external service that we use for our configuration files, so we don't have to do a code deployment in order to make that rollout change. In this case, we wanted to do both. So we have like code changes we want to get out there, but they're not necessarily related to the rollout itself. So we're verifying the code changes, and then once we feel confident that this deployment did not affect anything negatively or nothing unexpected happened, we'll make that percentage change, and you know, service B is gonna get a lot more traffic, service A is gonna get less traffic because we're changing where the data is coming from. So we can see that it finished about 5 minutes ago. So we can start verifying our changes. So I had a set of changes that modified our spec, our Swagger spec. This is basically saying what the input and output of our service is. We make an API that basically it has an input, it has an output, there's an expected set of tasks that are done with this operation, and so we modified some of our inputs and didn't tell people. Oops. I mean, we did tell people, but we just didn't update our spec or like the documentation, and so I updated that, and I'm just making sure it's showing up on the production page, and it is, which is good. And then my other change had to do with adding some integration tests, and so as long as the you know, test pass, in theory it's verified, and so we were able to deploy, all the tests passed. That's great, so I'm good verifying. Now we just have to wait for other people to verify our changes. To give you an idea of how many changes or sets of changes were included in this deployment, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Some of them were bug fixes, some of them, like mine, were modifying our documentation and then adding tests. Some of them had to do with modifying our properties that are embedded into our code. So overall, the deployment went well. No one is freaking out. There was a fiber cut, you know, which is not good, which caused some errors, but not due to our deployment. And we're gonna close the ticket, close the deployment, call it a successful deployment. And Anchor actually sent me 2 webcams. One was the smaller one that I showed you, and then this is the other one. It's a video bar, the B600, and it's an all-in-one personal conferencing solution. Now, I don't really do a lot of conferencing, but my brother does because he is an analyst. So let's go give this to him. So I have the B600 video bar set up on my brother's computer. We have a list of settings you can edit. We have the resolution, we have how close are we in the frame, brightness, sharpness, all the same stuff that we saw before. We also have this new setting. It has to do with the brightness of this light, and so there's actually a light attached to the B600 camera, and you can customize its brightness as well as the color temperature, so whether it's a warmer color or a cooler color. I'll kind of show you here with the warmer, you can kind of see it. It just kind of all looks like light in that other camera, but you can kind of see how it changes. You can have it always be on, turn it off. It is using a battery source that's not just your computer. The other camera used just your computer's battery. This uses your computer. It's linked to that as well as an additional power source, so with an outlet. If you have a fixed at-home setup, I would link this with a monitor just because due to the weight of it, it is heavier. But let's test it out in a video call. All right, so we need it to use my camera. So I'm going to go into video and we're gonna change it to using PowerComp C200. This is in Zoom, but depending on have a different setting set up if you're using Microsoft Teams or you're using a different video software, whichever setting that you use to set the camera, you might need to do that in order to have it use the right camera for that software. So we're gonna click the C200. So there we saw kind of that immediate comparison. And then there's my brother over there. Yeah, so this is the video quality for both the B600 and the PowerComp 200. And you kind of see the different qualities. The main difference between them is the size and the power that's used to power the device. Let's try turning off this camera so you can kind of see the difference between the Mac camera and these 2 cameras that we've gotten from Anchor. Okay, and so this is the after, a little bit different quality. There's only so great you're going to get with a webcam. A lot of your video quality will actually depend on your Wi-Fi connection and how great that connection is and the video software you're using for web conferencing. But upgrading your camera can be a great way to improve that remote working experience. All right, so we're back and we're still in the world of maintaining code and not building. And you might think, what could you possibly be doing when you're maintaining code? It just exists, the services, they use your product, and there's nothing else to do. Well, one thing you might do is delete code. And so there is some code that is legacy or deprecated. It's from a feature we don't use anymore. And that's what I'm working on today. And it's deleting this like legacy format for how we send data. And before we had a more generic format, now we have a more specific type format. So we use data now in the format, whereas before it was a little bit more generic. So we're deleting all of the generic code in favor for the new feature that uses the data we have more specifically. Super broad, but that's what we have to share. And you might think, why delete the code? What's wrong with the code just living there? It's not hurting anyone, it's just in the code base. Well, it can cause problems. It can cause a lot of confusion, especially if you're onboarding new engineers and you have a high attrition rate. You want to delete code that's not being used as to not confuse new engineers that are coming in and thinking, oh, this is the format we use. No, actually it's this other format. and you know, they might add code to the wrong file, you don't catch it in a code review, now it's causing problems, and you were just trying to maintain the service. And so deleting code that you're not using is a good idea. And you might think like, oh, maybe we'll use that code later. Well, that's why you have something like GitHub or a version control platform, so you can always look at what you removed previously and keep track of the changes you're making. You'd have some version control system that lets you see the history of how the code has been changed over time. So my pull request was approved. It ended up being 2,217 lines of code removed and 89 added. So hopefully it doesn't break anything. And it actually ended up being more complex than you would think, because it had to do with some deserializers, some serializers. There were some interfaces we were deleting, some abstract classes we were deleting and converting into concrete classes. So I think we're good. But it is merged and it will be put into staging and production next week. And then we can see absolutely nothing happen to the main application, or that's what we're hoping for. That this had no impact, it just made the code a little bit more organized, cleaner. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you Anchor for sponsoring. If you're interested in any of the products I mentioned, they'll be linked down in the description. See you next time, and happy coding.